KJ, I'm so excited that we're having this conversation today. So we were just talking about how we had sort of unusual circumstance that brought us together. In that I was ordained in 2012 and was told by others that I was the first Korean American woman ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church. So I was surprised to hear that, but also maybe not surprised because there aren't a ton of Koreans in the Episcopal Church in the first place. So that was a thing, and it was written about, and that's just sort of had been my understanding. And then I more recently discovered that that's actually not the case, and that there was actually another Korean American woman who was ordained, and sort of we were flown under the radar, or it hadn't been acknowledged at the time. Found out your name and reached out to you, and we connected and had just such a wonderful conversation. I didn't feel badly about the fact that I wasn't the first, but was sort of like, how did I not know about you?
Yes, well, and it was shocking to me
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
told that I was the first because no
yeah,
one ever cared before.
yeah.
So,
Right.
so
Which made me really sad that
yeah.
no one had cared before. I mean, I would love for you to just introduce yourself and just who you are, and yeah, maybe start with that.
So my name is Kyung Ja, and when I was born in 1951, my parents decided that I should have two names. I should have an Anglo name because we were American, and I should have a Korean name
Mm,
because we are Korean. And remembering back then, we didn't have the label Korean American. So
mhm.
my identity was always, I am Korean.
And really
So
quickly, just to insert myself really quick, your family immigrated like way before like my parents immigrated in the 60s, but your family came much earlier.
they came in 1903 in what is historically referred to as the first wave.
Yeah.
And these were the immigrants who ended up working as laborers on plantations. My ancestors went to the sugarcane plantations in Kauai
Yeah.
to begin their
Yeah.
immigrant life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I am talking about the Korean culture, I realize that I am talking about a period of time that has well passed.
Yeah.
And it would be like me talking about American culture um, 100 over 100 years ago.
Right.
The language is different, the social climate
Yeah.
is different,
Right.
perspectives have changed. So
Yeah.
my sense of Korean identity is kind of time locked
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
at
Yeah.
1903.
Right. Right. And you were saying that like in when you were born and in your younger years that like Korean American
Mhm.
wasn't really a thing. It was just
No,
Korean.
it was just Korean. In
Yeah.
fact, Korean was unknown. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all of the forms, medical forms, application forms would have identification of the applicant by race, and it
Mm-hmm.
was black, white, other.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I always checked other.
Right.
I didn't understand why, but I knew that that was the box that I was supposed to check.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Chicago in early 1950s. There were
Mm-hmm.
40 Korean families in the entire Chicago metropolitan area.
Wow.
And we all went to the same church,
Uh-huh.
and we all had holidays together.
Yeah.
And that was the core of the Korean community in Chicago at that time.
Hmm. And would you say like socially, like even outside of church, did you mostly stay with Koreans, or were you, I mean, obviously
Hmm.
you're going to school, the public schools and things like
I was
that.
going to
Yeah.
school in an all-white environment. We lived in an all-white environment. So school, home, church became the real center. Well, church is the center of a Korean community to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was the way we were. And so social events also involved people who were members of the church. So the
Yeah.
community stayed together that way.
Yeah. Right. And so what was like about in terms of that sort of like religious spiritual environment that you were in with the Korean community, like what was that like, or how did it shape you?
Church was all day.
I I
Went
know
to
that experience.
church. Okay, so we go
Yeah.
to church in the
Yeah.
morning. We do church. We have Sunday school. We go out and play. Pretty soon, somebody makes guksu. And we all come, and everybody, I don't know where all the food comes from, but there's massive amounts of food and mandu and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then we children would go out and play, and the adults would talk.
Mhm.
And then pretty soon somebody would make dinner, and we would all have dinner. And the next thing I would remember is waking up in my bed the next morning.
Hmm.
And that was church.
Yeah.
And it has a very warm feeling to
Mhm.
me. When we moved to American church, it was very different. Church was only a certain, like, it was an hour and a half. And, you don't talk to anybody, and, it was
Yeah.
very, very different experience. But I have very fond memories of church and being Korean community, but feeling extraordinarily isolated when I
Mm.
wasn't with my tribe.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because that you come from that experience and then moved to the Episcopal Church.
Mhm.
Um, just curious about your journey from this very Korean environment to a very white Anglo environment.
The only way I can explain that is that it was a God thing.
Mhm.
Um, After our experience with Korean church and then with American church, that did not work well with my parents for all kinds of reasons. And so we were unchurched.
Mm.
Um, as life circumstance would have it, I found myself as in college, um, in the um, late 60s, early 70s. Um, I was very much anti-establishment. God is dead. I was a philosophy major. I could even prove that there was no God. Um, the world was coming to an end, and so if there was a God, why didn't God do anything? And therefore, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so I went through that phase. Life circumstances again. It really occurred to me that there had to be something bigger than me, than
Mhm.
us, than this. Um, and I remembered the feelings that I had when I was younger. Um, so I had children, and I
Mhm.
wanted them to have something they could change later if they wanted to follow a faith, to follow no faith, but I wanted to give them some kind of basis.
Yeah.
Um, so I decided to go back and look at church, and didn't like the tradition of the Methodist Church as
Mhm.
an adult. Um, was fascinated by the Episcopal Church.
Mhm.
Um, they were, I was first introduced to the Episcopal Church because I was singing in a choir with the Methodist Church. We did a community service, Christmas or East or Thanksgiving, and combined neighborhood churches, and all these big choirs got together, and these four little people that looked like priests came processing in, and I thought they were so cute. And I didn't know what they were, but they did this a cappella version of a carol that was just fabulous. And I knew they were in the neighborhood, so I thought I would check out where these cute little priest people came from.
Were they little, like physically? They were physically small?
It was just, they were just this cute look. I mean, compared to 25 Methodists in a choir and 40 Baptists in a choir, here come four Episcopalians in this little bunch, and they just look cute. You know? I went on a curiosity visit and didn't understand any of the liturgy, couldn't follow any of the liturgy, but absolutely was mesmerized by the liturgy.
Yeah.
It brought a peace and a sense of being that I had never experienced before. As I went further into visiting, I realized that this was a tradition that seemed to me to respect my own personal experience, opinion, feelings, spirituality, rather than being confined to a very constricted belief system, which was what my experience of church was. Even in Korean church, when Lee Moksa said something, everybody was quiet and everybody listened.
Yeah.
And when he made a decision, that's what the decision was. I mean, so I knew the power of Moksanim.
In many ways, like that idea of like a Moksanim, which is a pastor in Korean, that it's very cultural too. I mean, just in terms of male hierarchy, all of that. It's very cultural and interesting because like the Episcopal Church is also, I mean, hierarchical in many ways, and yet you still have this experience of feeling like I can be who I am here.
Yeah, well, part of being who I am, Christine, is really about not being anybody. Being so isolated as a youngster, experiencing racism and not understanding, being taught at home, we're Korean, we do not do things like that in, you know, when we're in public or act a certain way. My entire identity was Korean and other. I knew I was not part of mainstream.
Yeah.
As I got older, as we got into the 70s, there was more immigration. And I started seeing more Koreans. And by this time, I was becoming a young woman, and I was becoming politically active, and I wanted to do some work for my people who were finally allowed to come. And there would be more of us, and it would be like church again. And in the 80s, immigration opened and all these Korean people came flooding into Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not acceptable to any of them
Mm.
because I lost the language.
Mm.
And my affect, third generation American,
Right.
I wasn't theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So this longing for an identity and having it finally realized and then having it just dismissed, I thought I could become a bridge to help the immigrant community assimilate appropriately, to get funding. I was a grant writer, to get funding for community programs and development. And I was very badly treated. I was made fun of. I wasn't paid. I wasn't treated well.
Mm.
I was other.
Mm.
So I'm not in the Korean culture, which I thought was my home. I am not in mainstream because it doesn't belong to me.
Yeah.
And then I discover I'm lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
and that puts me way outside of mainstream
Mm-hmm.
until very recent, the very
Right.
recent movement.
Yeah. Right.
I understand that I don't fit in anywhere.
Mm.
So it makes sense to fly under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
No one noticed that I was the first Korean American woman.
Yeah.
I didn't notice because who cares? No
Mm-hmm.
one cares about Asian anything until
Mm-hmm.
very recently.
Yeah.
And we are assimilated to be very quiet,
Right.
don't rock the boat,
Yes.
don't make waves, just keep your
Yeah.
head down and do your work
Right.
and do it well.
Mm-hmm.
So then I get this message, hey, guess what? You're the first Korean American. I'm thinking, really? Oh, I'm getting ready to retire, actually.
I know. Well, what was funny about our interaction was I was saying to you, I would really love to, because my being the quote unquote the first was so public and written about and acknowledged. I was like, I want to rectify the public record. And and initially you were like, no, just let
That's
it
all right. No,
settle.
that's all right.
Settle. It's okay, it's fine. And but in talking with you, I remember the first time we talked, I got kind of choked up as we talked. And I remember saying, because I think both of us were like, because even for me, when people were telling me, oh, you're the first, I'm not the kind of person to seek out that kind of attention. I mean, just like you're saying, especially Asian women have that tendency towards like, just being in the background, making yourself invisible. But then I think felt a sense of like, well, if it's true, that it should be acknowledged, especially when you're part of like a really white institution like the Episcopal Church. And but kind of feeling like as you and I had talked, I got choked up because I think we were both talking about how our journeys were pretty lonely journeys. And I think, you even just describing sort of the social, cultural, spiritual climate of that time, I'm so much more isolated than I even felt. And in fact, I feel like comparatively, I feel like I actually got really great support now that I look back in hindsight. But it has been a lonely journey for me too. And so when I learned about you, and then when you responded back to my email, I got kind of choked up because I felt like, oh, like this whole time I felt like I was alone, but I wasn't alone,
Yes, right.
and which was part of what makes me sad that your or you being the actual first Korean American woman ordained wasn't acknowledged, because like if it had been, I would have had you.
Yes.
I would
Yes.
have had you. And that makes me really sad. And just before we started recording, you were saying that since we've been talking, you've been thinking about firsts and what that's about. And I mean,
Hmm.
can you share what you were saying?
Well, I was
Okay.
being first, from what I've said, was a shock. But then what do you do with it?
Yeah.
What does it really mean? And we have our tradition in the church of commemorating people, and I honor that, and I think that that's important. For me personally, I didn't. I think of being the first as somebody who had this aspiration and um, strove and achieved and fought the odds and made it.
Mhm.
That's not my story. I kind of backed into it, fell over a rock, down into a pit, and then, climbed the tree root and got up again. And, mine was not graceful like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Mine was one of discovery and revelation,
yeah,
and a lot of the Holy Spirit,
yeah.
and really needing something more secure and bigger a
Mhm.
foundation than what we have on earth, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, I really felt that that boost was important. So being the first, it's not that KJO name needs to be in the book of lesser feasts and fasts, um, with the martyrs of Japan.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I want the statement to be, we are here,
Yes.
and we have been here
Yeah.
since 2002.
Mhm.
We are
Yeah.
not, we are new, but
Yeah.
we are not brand new.
Right.
And we have been here for a while, and we have been working to form the church from our
Mhm.
perspective
Yeah.
and to contribute to what the church becomes. That's what I think is really
Yes.
important.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it really is sort of that Western mindset of like the lone individual who like
Hmm.
strove for it and kind of made it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny to hear you describe your journey as being like falling over a rock and stumbling into it. Because I mean, that's sort of how it was for me too. I was like, I never wanted to become an Episcopal priest. It was like the
Right.
most foreign thing in the world, but it was really the spirit, the spirit's movement. And the spirit is always about community
Hmm.
and relationship, and even the Trinity itself is a community.
Right.
And I think sometimes in predominantly white institutions, there can be a kind of a pride when you can acknowledge a first, because it's a
Hmm.
little bit like, look at how diverse we are.
Hmm.
But then the
Hmm.
problem with that is like when we talk about Barack Obama becoming the first Black president, it can almost be like, so we've had one
Yeah.
and pat
Yes.
ourselves on
Right.
the back,
Yeah. Yes.
rather than saying like, no, this is about the building of a community.
Yeah.
And which is why, like, again, like I wish that I had known about you previously, because I feel like, even though all of our journeys are so different, like seeing someone or having somebody who shares some of that culture, like as you're talking about your Korean church experience, I'm like, I totally can understand the like
Yeah.
basically like living at church and
Yeah.
the sensuality of food and early morning prayer meetings, all of that kind of stuff. And so much of it is about to say like, we're not alone
Yeah.
in this journey.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that and going back to your earlier question, in this very Anglo church,
Hmm. Yeah.
is there room
Yeah.
for non-Anglos?
Yeah.
So do you have to be Anglo in order to be Anglican.
Mm.
And the world tells us, no, you do not have to be Anglo to be Anglican.
Yeah.
So when we are in an Anglo space, how do we begin to chip away at that image, self-image that's been created?
Mhm.
And that's what ministry is about, trying to
Yeah.
break through those kinds of crystallized images we have.
Right.